Move on to the content of the session, which is very exciting. I certainly think that kind of collaboration in its many forms is something libraries that are absolutely fantastic at. And we've got some really good examples of initiatives of library collaboration in this session, which hopefully we're all going to find really inspiring. And we can look at how we take some of these collaborations to the next level by working together. So I'm really excited to present our first speakers. We have Joanna Little, Programme Manager at the UK Print Book Collection through RLUK. And we have James Saunders, who's Associate Director, Content and Discovery at the University of Leeds. And they're going to be talking about the UK Print Book Collection. We'll just note that this is up and running now, and it's a collaboration between SCONUL, RLUK, the British Library and Jisc. So it's a really good example of sector cross-working. And they're going to talk us through this example of partnership learning. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Jane and Joanna.
Thank you, Wendy, and hello, everybody. I'm Jane Saunders, Associate Director for Content and Discovery at Leeds University Libraries and also a member of the UK Print Book Collection Board. Joanna Little is our Programme Manager for the UK Print Book Collection, and we're going to be talking this afternoon about the UK Print Book Collection as an example of partnership working to preserve access to print content. So we'll cover what the UK Print Book Collection, which is known as the UK PBC, is and how it came into being. We'll also talk about the challenges we faced in getting the UK Print Book Collection off the ground, but also the benefits that made us feel that it was worth overcoming those challenges and how we did that. And then we'll finish by talking about how you can join the UK PBC. So this is the vision for the UK Print Book Collection, a national distributed collection of print monographs with key bodies that underpin UK higher education libraries, all playing a role. And those bodies are RLUK, which are the UK, the research libraries that exist in the UK, SCONUL, which is that wider community of UK higher education libraries, our national libraries, in particular the British Library, and Jisc, which provides the digital infrastructure for higher education in the UK. And we are reliant on those bodies all working together to deliver that vision of ensuring preservation of and access to shared print holdings in the UK for current and for future users. So the UK Print Book Collection is a national distributed collection of monographs. The aim is that member libraries all play a role in preserving access to books for our wider UK community of users, and that we all reap the benefits of being able to make space savings should we need to. It works through libraries who join agreeing collectively to retain a minimum number of copies, and it is underpinned by the bibliographic data that libraries feed into Jisc's National Bibliographic Knowledgebase, known as the NBK. And that knowledge base drives Jisc's Library Hub Compare tool, which enables libraries to compare their holdings and abide by that minimum number of copies. And that minimum is 7. So 7 different libraries, each with a copy. The UK Print Book Collection builds on our rich history of shared print endeavours in the UK. And on the right-hand side of this slide, I've set out some of those endeavours. And on the left, I've pulled out some of the key landmarks, starting with the UK Research Reserve, which was launched in 2007 and focused on the preservation and deduplication of print journals to realise space savings, whilst also ensuring ongoing access to content. The UKRR proved highly successful, and it has paved the way for what we are now doing with books. And I'm delighted that the team who now manage the UKRR at the British Library are also now managing the UK Print Book Collection. Back in 2007, when the UKRR was being launched, we were relying on a UK Union catalogue that contained the records for the national libraries, but wasn't inclusive of all university libraries or all special libraries. And that changed in 2019 when Jisc launched Library Hub services underpinned by the National Bibliographic Knowledgebase, which today holds the records for over 200 libraries in the UK, and which made it possible for us to think about a shared approach to preserving access to print books. We took a step closer in 2020 when Jisc's Library Hub Community Advisory Board developed retention statements that libraries can add to the records of items that they will commit to retaining. And this led the print storage group within RLUK to think with Jisc about taking a distributed approach to the preservation of access to print books. With our records in Jisc's National Bibliographic Knowledgebase, we can each compare our holdings against the holdings of other libraries and thereby avoid disposing of rare items. So that led us to joining with SCONUL and the British Library to develop the idea of the UK print book collection, which was launched in autumn 2025 and which has the objectives of protecting the value of our national print collection, preserving access to print books at a national level, providing reliable access to scarce print material, informing decision-making in relation to collection management, and facilitating efficient and responsible use of library spaces. And membership of the UK print book collection is open to any higher educational specialist library in the UK whose data is in that National Bibliographic Knowledgebase. And there are 3 levels of membership. There is the participating member, where you agree to check your holdings against the national holdings in the NBK when you are stock editing. And if you are one of 7 or fewer libraries holding a copy, you will agree to retain it. Then we have retaining members, where if you find you are one of 7 or fewer holding libraries for a book, you not only retain it, but you also add a retention statement to the record for that book. And we do have guidelines available for the adding of those retention statements. And finally, we have receiving members who, in addition to retaining items and adding retention statements, will consider receiving copies that cannot be retained by other member libraries. But the hope is that libraries can make any necessary space savings by focusing on books where there are 8 or more copies held nationally. So in terms of the challenges, well, we are trying to do something that is reliant on collaboration between separate organisations. Fortunately, we are doing something that aligns both with libraries' missions to give access to information and that very practical requirement to use space effectively and efficiently. So the big effort has been around bringing the right people together and formalising that goodwill into something that can be operational and sustainable. Working with existing infrastructures has been key. So critically, Jisc's National Bibliographic Knowledgebase and also the British Library with their team who already administer the UKRR. That meant that with Jisc and the British Library, with support from RLUK and SCONUL, we could develop a workable framework. And for that framework, we drew on the operations of library shared print projects in North America, in particular, to draw up those formal agreements that we need. It was also important to be able to demonstrate that the model for the UK print book collection is workable in terms of the spread of print books across the UK. So it was key for us to leverage the data available in the National Bibliographic Knowledgebase to look at that distribution and to demonstrate that it's not the same 5 or 6 or 7 libraries all holding that relatively rare material. So developing our understanding of the data was time-consuming, but it was also critical, and we're hugely indebted to Jisc's NBK team for supporting that. What the data did show is that with a threshold of 7 copies across 7 libraries, libraries will be being asked to retain between 20 and 50% of their collections, depending on the nature of those collections. So we were able to demonstrate that a distributed collection can work. And the challenge, of course, now is to generate that critical mass of libraries prepared to join the UK print book collection. And what has kept those of us involved going, and we started working on this in earnest in 2022, has been the sense of the benefits that we can see for us as libraries and also for our users in terms of that preservation of access to content now and for the future. And from a library perspective, we we are able to make informed decision making around collections with that national perspective, which also enables us better to understand the rarity and the value of the items that we hold. And of course, we can see opportunities for future development. So, for example, opportunities for collaborative approaches to digitisation. But for more on collaborative approaches, I'm now going to hand over to Joanna.
Thank you very much, Jane. Yes, I'm going to talk about how we overcame some of the challenges with the UK print book collection, what we saw as the keys to success, and hopefully some of these keys to success may be applicable to some work and projects that you're thinking about. And I'm going to start off, as Jane mentioned, with the very first key to success, and that's collaboration. Collaboration has been absolutely key to the UK print book collection. We're so grateful to everyone that has helped us make it a success. We've got the British Library, RLUK, Jisc and SCONUL all working together. And then we've got the board providing strategic direction, and the board is made up of representatives from a cross range of organisations, and the board is supported by an advisory group and a delivery group. And then we've also got the receiving libraries acting as a backstop if member libraries aren't able to retain one of the last 7. We've got pilot libraries who have helped us test the approach. And then finally, all our member libraries work together to make the UK print book collection work. So collaboration is absolutely key to the UK print book collection. Another key ingredient, another way we've overcome challenges, is by having a pilot, by testing the approach. Before we went live, we tested the approach of the UK print book collection with 2 cohorts of pilot libraries representing RLUK, SCONUL and specialist libraries. And that was really brilliant to help us review processes, reporting, documentation, support and technology. And it really proved that the UK print book collection worked. It proved that the theory worked, and it gave us a great community of supporting libraries who have now become really valuable advocates for the UK print book collection. So the pilots were absolutely key, and they've been so helpful. Another key to success has been to keep it simple. It's free to join the UK print book collection. There aren't any financial barriers to entry. And we've got this key lucky number 7. I feel if nothing else, people can remember this threshold level of 7. There are 3 clear levels of membership. And that sort of first level of membership hopefully means that no one is put off by joining. The difficulty of joining is just very low. There's lots of support available to everyone via the website, via training sessions. And we've also made the reporting very simple and easy to do. And finally, in keeping it simple, we've managed not to be distracted by what you might think of as the edge cases. I think there can be a tendency to plough through every possible scenario, no matter how unlikely. And although we have scenario planned quite a bit, I think it's really important to focus on what will happen most of the time and not get distracted by the edge cases. Let's keep it simple. Let's focus on what will happen most of the time. Another key to success, another way of overcoming challenges, has been the right level of formalisation. The UK print book collection is very much based on goodwill. There's no money changing hands here. And as a result, we don't want an overly bureaucratic process in place, but equally we need something in place so people are clear of what they've signed up to, will commit to that, and to ensure that the UK print book collection has longevity. So with that in mind, we've put in place a memorandum of understanding for member libraries to sign. There's a statement of intent for partners to sign, so RLUK, Jisc and the British Library. We've got governance for the programme and the board, and we've also got a board, an operational group and an advisory group. So the last key to success is to have a program manager and use a program management framework. I know I'm a bit biased, but I think this has really helped and is something to really consider if you are looking to put a big program or project in place, particularly a national one or one with lots of partners. So if you have a program manager and a program management framework, that gives you the benefits of one overall point of responsibility. It ensures that benefits realization, vision, target operating model are all planned in and thought through as early as possible and are fundamental to the design of your program. A program management approach ensures proactive risk and issue management. It strengthens governance, which is particularly important in this complex partnership environment. It means you've got someone to manage stakeholder engagement and communications. It also means that key documents are in place, both from a program point of view and from a policy operational point of view. And this really helps with transparency, clarity, and in this complex partnership environment also mitigates against changes in personnel. There are quite likely to be changes in personnel over a long time period. So having the key documents in place so everyone knows what was agreed is very useful and very important. And then finally, if you bring a program or project manager in place, I think it really helps to get the program over the line, bring together all the brilliant work that everyone's been doing, and really kind of finalize things, get everything in place and get the program over the line and live. So my penultimate slide is talking about our successes. We went live with the UK print book collection in October 2025. And so far we've got membership in the 30s, reflecting a broad range of institutions from SCONUL, RLUK and specialist libraries. We have, for example, got the Tate and the National Railway Museum on the books, as well as an awful lot of university libraries, and more names keep on coming through each week. And it's also really pleasing to see such a high percentage of libraries joining as receiving libraries. I think either because of a sense of civic purpose or because they see it as an opportunity to grow their collections in areas where they're interested. So I couldn't quite end without a pitch. I really would like you to join the UK print book collection. If you're an RLUK member, over half of RLUK members have already joined. So if you haven't joined, you're in the less cool half, so please do join. And if you're a SCONUL member or a specialist library, we would love you to join too, because we've got lots of SCONUL and specialist libraries as members, and we really would like to get as many as possible. So please do visit the website, contact the British Library, choose your membership level, sign the Memorandum of Understanding, and retain monographs where you are one of the last 7 UK libraries with a copy. So please do join, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jane and Joanna. I think that just goes to show what a robust sort of pathway that was to the launch of the UK print book collection, and sort of the care that's been taken over the preparation before the launch. So hopefully people feel as though that's such a good foundation for joining up. I'm probably supposed to be neutral as chair, aren't I? But do join up and take note of Joanna's last slide. Do also, whilst our next speaker Sarah is getting her slides ready to share on the screen, don't be shy about putting your questions in the sort of Q&A section. We've got a couple already, so we're up and running, but there's still plenty of scope for more. So as soon as you think of them, do put them down, and we will pick them up at the end of the session. But we will move now on to our second speaker, Sarah Lippincott, who is Senior Researcher in Invest in Open Infrastructure, which really does what it says on the tin, a not-for-profit, which is all about investing in open infrastructure. And she's going to be talking about their report, the Orbit project, which is going to look at some pathways for open infrastructure development. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and thanks for having me here. So I'll start with a question. How many of you have been in a conversation in the last 12 months at your institution about financial sustainability, whether it's your institution's budget pressures or concern about vendor pricing for a technology that you rely on, or what happens to a piece of technology you depend on when their funding dries up? I'm imagining that most of your virtual hands are going up. And that anxiety about sustainability, about dependency, about who holds things together when those financial pressures are increasing is exactly where this project started. The orbit landscape scan was led by myself and my colleagues, Catherine Skinner, Lauren Collister, and Chris Wu. We are with Invest in Open Infrastructure, or IOI, a nonprofit whose mission is to catalyze investment in and adoption of open digital research infrastructure. And we believe that library consortia have a critical role to play in that mission. And this project set out to understand what that role could look like in practice, or how we can help to advance the work that consortia are already doing in this area. The study had two components. We reviewed strategic plans and public materials from a convenience sample of US-based library consortia, organizations like the Texas Digital Library, the Boston Library Consortium, and the Big Ten Academic Alliance in the US. These are consortia that may have a regional geographic region in common, or another type of characteristics in common. And we conducted 12 in-depth interviews with consortium leaders over the summer of 2025. That timing is important. These conversations were taking place against a backdrop of serious political and economic disruption in the United States, to put it mildly. The defunding of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, a major funder of libraries and library programs in the US, federal funding cuts that were hitting university budgets, and a broader atmosphere of fiscal austerity across higher education as a whole. So we were speaking with consortium leaders who were navigating these acute pressures in real time. You can read our full report via the links on your screen, and I'll also share those links again at the end. So why do we think consortia play such an important role in advancing open infrastructure and in helping libraries to invest in and better utilize open infrastructure, whether that's things like digital repositories for literature or data, whether that is preprint or other repositories that they rely on, or that their stakeholders rely on, all the kinds of digital research tools and technologies that libraries use and that their stakeholders use, that research depends on. Consortia sit between institutions and infrastructure, and they can have a convening power that helps coordinate investment across multiple institutions. Many consortia already host or support shared services, whether that's digital infrastructure services or shared print services and shared training and professional communities. So they have this latent capability. They have the skill set in-house to coordinate and convene. And consortia are already playing a critical role in stabilizing library services in a challenging environment. And in particular, they're expanding into areas that build on their legacy of coordinating things like shared print programs to advance shared and open digital infrastructure in order to evolve their own business models and increasingly to fill critical gaps for libraries who are experiencing these various pressures that I mentioned. As one consortium leader put it, the status quo for libraries, for research libraries in the US, is becoming unsustainable due to a cluster of converging pressures like vendor consolidation, which is pushing up costs for proprietary systems, federal funding cuts that create budget shortfalls, workforce reductions that are eroding their in-house expertise, and things like lower and lower enrollment, which is threatening the financial sustainability of especially smaller institutions. Several of the leaders we talked to described preparing for scenarios in which member institutions might close entirely. Others talked about members entering lifeboat mode, having to make really difficult decisions about what services they can afford to retain. So in this context, consortia are being asked to step up and to fill that gap and to do more with less. Members are looking to their library consortia to replace their lost internal capacity, to help them find ways to control their costs, and to provide a safety net. And this is coming precisely at a moment when consortia themselves are also experiencing or anticipating financial strain. But what united the leaders that we interviewed was this emphasis on their role as conveners, coordinators, and connectors and strategists. So that's where we think they can really leverage those skills to help to address these critical gaps and help provide more sustainable, more predictable funding for open infrastructures. From our interviews, we saw 5 major ways that consortia are already stepping into the open infrastructure space with this in mind. And we called these strategic pathways in our report. And over the next few slides, I'll describe a little bit of what each of these means. And it's useful to note, again, that consortia aren't entering the open infrastructure space purely out of altruism or on principle or just to support open. Their investments need to demonstrate value to their members. They need to show tangible returns in the form of community benefit, like cost or time savings for their members, or improved satisfaction with the products, the technologies they work with, and the kind of ecosystem sustainability that these tools that librarians and researchers rely on will continue to endure. So hosting is the first strategic pathway. This is really about leveraging economies of scale, hosting digital repositories, open publishing platforms, or preservation environments, digital preservation environments. And we saw this the most happening mostly for infrastructure that supports the creation, distribution, discovery, and preservation of open content. That's already very well aligned with what consortia do, and so it makes sense that this is becoming something that they're really expanding into. And I think the opportunity here is to extend this, to increase the scale of collaboration by actually working across consortia. So not just one consortium hosting on behalf of its member institutions, but actually in the US context, at least having multiple consortia work together to specialize and offer services to members of multiple consortia. Building is about countering market consolidation by developing or adapting open source tools in areas where commercial options have fallen short or where they've become unaffordable. We documented a lot of frustration among consortium leaders about dependency on 1 or 2 dominant vendors whose prices had become exorbitant over time. We heard instances where needs are highly specialized, such as software for managing high-density storage inventory, and are therefore underserved by the marketplace. So here, investing in open source alternatives is really a risk management strategy, reducing exposure to vendor failure and price hikes, and market exit by vendors that provide critical services. So coordination, again, through the consortium or between multiple consortia, ensures that this tool building is done with care and there isn't duplicated effort across multiple institutions building the same open source tools. Sponsoring is about aligning financial commitments to existing community-driven platforms. These are services like the Directory of Open Access Journals or Archive or the Open Library of Humanities, which are foundational to the research ecosystem, but that rely in large part on voluntary contributions that are often fragmented and unpredictable. And so we argue that coordinating investment that not only is more money needed in the system, but that coordinating investment is essential and more valuable than the same amount spread thin. And so pooled planning and communication would allow the library community to cover a wide spectrum of needs without overburdening their individual budgets. And can also give libraries a stronger collective voice in shaping the governance of the infrastructures that they invest in and rely on. training addresses the erosion of expertise within member institutions. A lot of consortia already do this. I know the UK consortia already do this quite well, and many of the US library consortia do this as well. And as staff leave and positions are cut within libraries, their libraries are losing that internal institutional knowledge and that they need in order to engage with open infrastructure, whether that's infrastructure that they are managing or maintaining, or whether that's infrastructure that their researchers may rely on and that they want to be prepared to help support. Cultivating is about shared governance and project administration. And this is kind of along the lines of what Joanna was talking about in the previous talk. It's this, the need to build out the actual mechanisms of cooperation and move beyond the kind of just goodwill and handshake kind of relationships that characterize a lot of multi-institution projects. And so there's an opportunity here for consortia to help with that, to help institutions formalize those kinds of agreements so that they can more effectively operate at scale. So our scan documented all of these strategies already being used in library consortia in the US. This is a screenshot just of a few examples that you can see a wide range of open infrastructure projects being supported by various consortia in a range of ways, whether that's because they're hosting these tools locally, whether they're contributing to development or developing them in-house, whether they have a membership or license, etc. But there are challenges in this environment, notably risk aversion. Leaders described a kind of a wait and see mentality and a lot of inertia in this environment, which could potentially increase our long-term vulnerability by preventing adaptations. And moving from project to community has been structurally hard for many projects that we heard about. And finally, I think one of the biggest challenges is deciding where to invest. This is a genuinely difficult decision. There's too many things to support, too many wonderful projects to support, no shared framework for prioritization. And leaders told us they also lacked a lot of the necessary tools to evaluate infrastructure for investment and lacked visibility into their members' needs. So there's a growing recognition that individual institutions can't go it alone here in this environment and taking into account these risks, and that consortia need to coordinate more systematically with one another. And so this idea of a network of networks, which I'll credit Morris York at the BTAA for coining this phrase, is the idea of bridging across consortia and building even more scale and potential. So though our study focused on the US for now, I think the underlying logic applies well in the UK context. And so I'll leave you with some ideas for what to do with this information. Specifically, I think mapping the landscape. What is your library already investing in? What open infrastructure are you already engaging with, and in what ways? And how can you bridge across institutions and potentially across consortia to support that? So thank you. Here's how to get in touch with us to find out at IOI, to find out more about our work if you're interested. And you can read more about the project at the links on this slide. I'm interested to hear how this resonates in the UK context, and how you at your institution or with your consortia may already be implementing these kinds of strategic pathways. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Really interesting. I think whilst Caroline's getting their slides ready, I think we could perhaps just sum that up actually as a sort of challenge to ourselves as a community. Can we take the current financial pressures that we find ourselves facing into a bit more of an opportunity to think a bit differently and more collaboratively in terms of consortia for open infrastructure? And can we be a bit less risk averse? that was a sort of really useful challenge there, I think. Can we break through that sort of slight risk averse area to sort of be innovative and make some new developments in open that would really transform the sort of sector space? So there's a challenge for us to think about. Hopefully that might stimulate some questions too. We still do have a couple in the Q&A section. Just a reminder, it is the Q&A and not the chat that we're putting the questions into. So please do keep those coming. There's no kind of question that's not relevant here, really. So don't be shy, and we'll pick those up at the end. So, but without further ado, we shall move on to a collective of Carolines. We have Caroline Ball, who's the Community Engagement Lead at the Open Book Collective. And we also have Professor Caroline Edwards, who's Executive Director at the Open Library of Humanities and is also on the board of the Open Journals Collective. So over to you, Caroline and Caroline.
Thank you. Yep, that's not going to get confusing at all, is it, with a plethora of Carolines. Thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. What Caroline and I want to do in the next 15 minutes is give you a bit of an idea, give you a bit of an indication of something that is working, basically. We're not here to do a sales pitch or to ask for favors. What we want to do is use the Open Book Collective and the Open Journals Collective as a way to think about what can actually be achieved and what is actually possible through collective action and collaboration, and using our two organizations as an example of that. Now we've titled our presentation as kind of scaling small, which probably sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but I think it does actually capture what the OBC and the OJC do pretty well, because I think traditionally in academic libraries, when we do get confronted with the kinds of challenges that we're all kind of grappling with at the moment, is to kind of look for the big solutions, the big sort of national agreements, the big transformative deals with, their big multi-million-pound price tags. And they have their place. Some may agree, some may disagree. In some places they work, but in many ways they're just not really sufficient. And I think in some cases, they are actively making things worse. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenges. There's probably nothing on here that is going to be news to anyone in this session. And I suspect that nobody attending this is going to need convincing that something's gone wrong with academic publishing. Something has gone quite badly wrong. We're seeing various sort of sector reports that are estimating that somewhere between 25 and 60% of some library acquisitions budgets are being swallowed up by these big commercial journal packages. Sometimes, with libraries that are facing really significant cuts, they are having to choose between, the big deals and, perhaps a book budget. And the current pace of these sort of transitional agreements, a recent sort of Jisc report calculated that it's going to take 70 years to flip those titles to open access. In 70 years, that is not a road to an open future. I mean, if you forgive me for kind of stretching that metaphor a little bit, that's a traffic jam at best, probably a roadblock or a road closure at worst. We have seen at least 10 UK universities, I think at last count, walking away from their big Elsevier deals. So I think that does tell us that the tolerance for this kind of arrangement is fading. It is waning. I think it is starting to be seen, not just by librarians as something that is unsustainable. From a sort of political, financial, academic viewpoint, it is starting to be seen as something that is not working for us. And then obviously you do have the kind of elephant in the room of all discussions in academia at the moment. You do have AI, this issue of the big commercial publishers starting to sell academic work as AI training data, sometimes without opt-outs for authors, and that is academic outputs that are largely produced either via sort of public funding, university funding, that is academic staff's kind of time, and labour and knowledge and expertise, and it's increasingly being seen as just another commodity, something that can be packaged and bought and sold, and that's without the consent really of those who are actually doing the producing, and often without compensation either. So I think it is not a question of if something needs to change. I think it is about who is going to be shaping that change, because we know that if librarians, libraries, publishers, research communities, if we don't step up and start driving and shaping that change ourselves, the big commercial players are absolutely going to step into that role. And we already know what their priorities will be. And it isn't us. So that is the kind of landscape that we're working in, the kind of landscape that gave rise to these two initiatives that Caroline and I are going to be talking about. And I'm going to hand over to Caroline now to talk a little bit about one of these initiatives that were built quite deliberately as ways of driving this change on community terms rather than those kind of commercial alternatives. So I will hand over to Caroline now.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I really liked your image of the traffic jam. If transformative agreements are intending to transition the sector towards open access, they're a roadblock. One way that we've been thinking about this at the Open Journals Collective is that if that's the way that commercial publishing is monopolising our sector, then actually we need an exit ramp, and we need it pretty fast. And so the Open Journals Collective started in conversations I had with library colleagues back in about October 2024. We moved deliberately quickly to formalise as a community interest company based in the UK. So that's effectively a non-profit. In May 2025, and we launched in January 2026. So it's taken us sort of 12-18 months really to get to a point where we are now a fully functioning organisation, and that was deliberately timed because of the rapidly changing landscape with Jisc's kind of negotiations on behalf of the library sector, and whether these big deals were going to be renewed and whether we would see more walkaways, as Caroline just mentioned. So what is the Open Journals Collective? It's an international collective of scholars, libraries and university-based or small non-profit independent publishers. We believe that academic research should be available to all without any author fees and without any paywalls. So we are focusing on diamond open access journals. But our broader mission is quite ambitious. We want to build a sustainable future for academic journals, specifically by challenging those profit-making models of global corporate publishing giants, which are now, as Caroline just mentioned, data systems selling, AI deals and so on. So when we launched, just coming up for 7-8 weeks ago, we have 286 journals in our collections. They are divided. There's the whole collection, which we call the multidisciplinary collection. And then there's an arts, humanities and social sciences collection, and a science, technology, engineering and mathematics collections. So this is the kind of scaling small, where you bring together community-run journals supported by Diamond open access publishers. And effectively you design an investment and support infrastructure that sits on top of these journals' pre-existing business models, if they have them. Many of them don't. So OJC, through its library membership program, is raising money, and that money is going to be allocated across those journals by the end of this year for the first year. And we take into account any funding gaps that those journals have. So there really is a range. Some journals have library membership models already in place through billing agents such as Jisc or Lyrasis. Others receive little to no funding, and then there's a whole range in the middle. So it is a really involved, complex piece of work that requires our library colleagues to help us figure out the most equitable way of sharing that funding. We have tiered membership available through Jisc in the UK. That was clear early on that we had to do that to reduce the admin burden on libraries. And the membership benefits, it's not just about investment. As Sarah was saying, it's also about community governance and input. OJC has been designed from the bottom up with library colleagues. It wouldn't exist without their input. Everything from the kind of pricing structure to the models for support for journals to how the revenue will be distributed to the cash management plan for how we're going to hold funds on behalf of journals. How do we store that safely? How do we ensure trust and transparency? How do we make available financial data for journal funding streams so that it's incredibly clear to everybody which bits of money are going where? All of that has been designed by the library community. We have plans to flip 50 journals into the collections over the next 2 years. And looking ahead, we're going to be opening up applications later on this summer for more for more publishers to join the collective. There's about 20 publishing members at the moment, and we've got more applications coming in. And we also have an advocacy program. So we are proactively reaching out through our editorial journal networks to colleagues in various disciplines to be able to help us identify journals that want to flip. And I'll just say one more thing before I hand back to Caroline, which is that I'm happy to say this data is already out of date. We now, as of this morning, have 19 library members who have already placed orders through Jisc and the Centre for Research Libraries in the in the US. So we have now raised nearly £800,000 in just 7 weeks. That, I think you'll agree, is quite impressive, and that's just the beginning. That's I think it's just over 31% of the money that we need to raise this year. So hopefully a good example of what Sarah was describing, that we need more of that collaborative investment decision making amongst the sector. Back to you, Caroline.
Thank you. In many ways, I think the Open Book Collective can kind of be, sort of seen as a bit of a proof of concept for OJC. We emerged from the COPIM project, which stands for Community-Led Open Publication Infrastructures for Monographs project. It's a bit of a mouthful. You can see why we use COPIM. And that ran from 2019 to 2023. And it was to bring together, universities, libraries, publishers, technology providers, all with a basic kind of, what if sort of question at the heart of it, which was like, what would it look like to build, like open access book infrastructure that actually is designed to serve the people who are producing and using academic scholarship rather than, the ones who are profiting from it. And it was from that project that the Open Book Collective emerged, and obviously subsequently the Open Journals Collective. And it functions in a very, very similar way to the Open Journals Collective. So I'm not going to sort of talk, in great detail about, the sort of the way the pricing structures work or the tiers or kind of how funds are dispersed, because it is a very, very similar mechanism, just with kind of books and monographs instead of journals. But it's been running for 3 years now. We currently have, I think, 17 publisher and sort of university press and service provider members. And these are, as of our sort of last statistics, being supported by 94 libraries across 14 countries. And that is steady growth. We have plans for growth as well. But it goes to show, as Caroline was saying, that there's real appetite for this kind of approach. There is a real desire, I think, to move to a more community-based model. And I think the community element and then the way that is involved in everything that the Open Book Collective does is one of the things that really distinguishes us, I think. So we are a registered charity, and that is important. It might not sound like it at first, but it's one way to build in the kind of safeguards against the kinds of like acquisition and commercial capture that unfortunately we've seen with quite a few of kind of community-led initiatives or open access initiatives. They often start out with the best of intentions, and then before you know it, they've ended up owned by sort of Springer or Elsevier. We have sort of designed our structure quite deliberately to make that very, very difficult, if not impossible. But a big thing that I think really distinguishes, both the Open Book Collective and the Open Journals Collective is our sort of governance approach. So we are not just kind of funded by libraries. They are co-governors in the way that we work. So the Open Book Collective, we have what we call a General Assembly of Custodians. And this is made up of our sort of publisher and service provider members, and also our library supporters, all of whom hold voting positions if they choose. And they really help to, advise, direct, and help kind of shape the policy of the organisation. And then we have a board of stewards, and they take a more kind of direct, sort of hands-on managerial role, and they are elected from the General Assembly. So it's not a kind of consultative approach where, communities kind of get invited to comment on decisions that are by and large already decided. It's real community investment and direction. And another element that we think distinguishes us and that we're quite proud of is our Community Development Fund. And this is a fund where a small portion of the funds that our members receive, and it's a voluntary portion, but so far every single one of them has been happy to donate these funds, goes to grants that are aimed at supporting, open access kind of book publishing and capacity and infrastructure in under-resourced countries globally. So it's another way to try and build equity kind of into the open access infrastructure by design, building it from the ground up rather than it being a kind of add-on or an afterthought. So, we're 3 years in now, and we like to think that the Open Book Collective and, absolutely no doubt the Open Journals Collective soon really proves that this kind of collective funding, this kind of collective investment, it works, it is viable. And it is sustainable in the long term, and it genuinely can be an alternative to those kind of big commercial models. So I'm going to hand back again to Caroline for this last slide. It's a bit weird sort of going, Caroline, back to you. Caroline, back to you.
I feel like we're doing a surreal radio show.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Okay, so just a couple of things to say before we open up for questions for the whole panel. So the Open Journals Collective and the Open Book Collective they are two separate independent organisations. OBC, as Caroline mentioned, is a charity. Open Journals Collective is a community interest company, but we will also be applying to convert to a UK charity in December of 2026. What connects us formally is a signed memorandum of understanding, which may have even gone live whilst this panel was happening, but I think the publicity was this is like an exclusive, hot off the press. It's out there now, so you can go and look it up online. That's because we have shared values. We both believe in diamond open access and non-profit governance. Both organisations believe in transparency and bibliodiversity. We work very collaboratively together. So the two teams informally already knew each other. We have partner organisational experience dating back many years. So it's a very productive collaboration. And we're sharing technology and tools. So one thing that we've not yet, another exclusive, just for this audience, we've not yet had the time to announce a new impact dashboard. So this is a piece of work that's being developed with Open Book Collective, Open Journals Collective, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and SciPost. And so technology developers at all four of our organisations are working on a code base and repurposing some old code that SciPost wrote many years ago before Open ALEX was launched. And what we need is something Sarah pointed to in her talk a moment ago, the evaluative tools that libraries need to help make that business case for investment. It can be quite hard with fragmented, small diamond open access publishing initiatives to find the data that is required to take to your budget holder to say, look, we really do need to be investing in these shared infrastructures, and here is why. So that impact dashboard is going to be providing any librarian who wants to look us up on both organisations with author affiliations of our published content, editorial affiliations where relevant on the journal side, usage data, and it's going to be open source. You know, we have our GitHub repositories. We're going to be building on this kind of shared open ecosystem of infrastructure, which is so important. So I think just, yeah, to open things up, I fully support what Sarah was saying about coordinating investment and planning this kind of more pooled, coordinated approach. It's really all about giving libraries a much stronger collective voice and tackling that inertia. I hope that these two presentations for OBC and OJC might have persuaded this audience that this is working, this really is, and folks who are feeling a little nervous and want to wait and see what's happening, don't wait much longer, because we really do need to act now if we're going to have meaningful change to move ourselves out of a commercial stranglehold that simply nobody can afford in the US, in the UK, in Europe and elsewhere. So yeah, back to the panel host. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Caroline and Caroline. Have you thought of a podcast? I think you'd great name for a podcast together.
Yeah, good double act.
Good double act, brilliant. And we also like a conference exclusive, so thank you very much for that. Brilliant. But also, you know, following on from the other two presentations, a really important kind of question, again, a sort of call to arms almost to, can we rethink our kind of investment and licensing strategy, you know, across various forms of content, and can we start to, instead of taking those steps in a direction, really get to a position where we can shift the dial in terms of the balance of the type and nature of investments that we're making. So I think all three presentations really highlighted aspects of that, which is probably why they're all on the same panel programme, to stimulate that kind of conversation. And we do have some time now to have a bit of a discussion. So I think all our panelists are back on screen, which is great to have everyone back. And we do have some questions in the Q&A section, so we'll take them each in turn. So the first one, some of them are for specific speakers, but then we can sort of broaden out the chat, I think, on the basis of those. So the first one was, they're obviously in the order of the presentation. So the first one's for Jane. You might have had a chance to read through this in advance. Ownership of the physical material is a key enabler of this preservation project. Translating this to an electronic content space for resilience and thinking of collaborative action will be more challenging when much scholarly content has been licensed as subscription content for many years, even with PCA. What strategies do you think would be best to translate to that electronic space for similar success? So we're starting with a really easy question here. So thanks to anonymous attendee for that lively one to get us started. Jane.
Yeah, no, I think it is a big issue, isn't it? That you know, how do we address that longevity of what's existing electronically? And even if we're talking about a format that is kind of relatively stable, like a book, an electronic book, we know that so many of them are now shifting to subscription models. And even things that you think you might have purchased in perpetuity, when you actually read the licenses, they're really only guaranteeing you access for, say, 5 years or so. So yeah, this idea that we own items in perpetuity, I think is deeply troubling, because I don't think that we do, and I don't think it is anything that as individual institutions we can address on our own. So I absolutely think it is a challenge that we need to address collaboratively. You know, and I don't know if it's worth exploring things like electronic legal deposit. You know, that is a route for preserving content that is published in the UK, but the key problem there is that the access to that content is so kind of tied down. But I wonder if it's something like that where we need to look at a centralized approach, and we need to look at the parameters that surround that, and we need to obviously be doing that as a community. So yeah, definitely one that we need to be thinking about as a community.
Thanks, Jane. Does anyone else want to come in on that one? No, that's fine. I think, yeah, it's a big issue and a complicated issue, and we definitely can't do it ourselves. It would be quite an interesting discussion to further develop, I think. You know, is there some kind of scoping which is needed in this area first, you know, in terms of gathering issues and evidence bases together before you perhaps get even to the next step? So that's a kind of a question for us collectively. And how would we do that? So there's a nice factual question, which is a little bit of an easier one next. Just a clarification on the UK print book collection. Are books just in the English language?
No. So if it's a book and you hold it, it's included.
Excellent. That's just a nice clarification. So thanks for that. Our next question is for Sarah. Are IOI US Library Consortia working with academic leadership networks, e.g. mission groups and sector representative bodies, to drive the collaboration agenda, thinking there of parallel with UK Jisc shared services conversations in the UK?
That's a great question. That's not something that came up in explicitly in the research that we did. Many of the library consortia that we worked with are funded by or sponsored by their state government, and often have connection, are looped into conversations at the leadership level in the higher education institutions they serve, and are connected into state government, which can also help them make connections, outside of just the library administrations. But that's not something that came up specifically in our conversations as a pathway that they've been looking at for coordinated investment. So that's something that I'll take a look at. Thank you for providing that parallel.
Thanks, Sarah. Again, maybe from the UK perspective, is there any other kind of comments from the rest of our panelists on the kind of UK picture in terms of our kind of academic interface? Jane?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important that we as a community connect with those other bodies that represent higher education. I mean, we do try to do that in the UK to a certain extent. I think there is an organisation called, well, in the library world, we often interface with an organisation called BuffDog, which I believe is the finance directors, isn't it? And so what we're trying to do there is kind of it not just being a library lobby for what it is we're trying to achieve, but to draw in the wider sector. So yeah, no, I definitely agree that's something we ought to be doing.
Yeah, I think we have the fellow administrative organisations like the Association for University Administrators. Yes, of course, we've got Jisc as well. These are the professional networks, but in terms of the academic community, I suppose in the UK we have good relations with our research councils in the UK, which is a sort of funding structure which perhaps isn't paralleled in quite the same way in other countries globally. And so that really is a route in for us in terms of having those conversations with UKRI and the individual funding councils and more broadly other funders. So something to be mindful of in terms of our pathways, but always those smaller academic communities as well. Sometimes things scale from specific discipline areas where there are a host of kind of organizations that have lenses on that, and we mustn't forget that either, because one of the elements there is those society sort of publishing has always been a topic for debate as well, hasn't it? So that's another route into our kind of academic community. But yeah, good question. Any other panelists want to come in, or we can move on to the next question? We're doing quite nicely for time. So we've got a question from Phil. This is for Sarah, commenting that Sarah mentioned the difficulty of moving from project to community, a phrase that he's really commending, a phrase he loves, which seems relevant to all three presentations. Are there any ways that are particularly effective at easing this difficulty? So I don't know, Sarah, whether you want to kind of respond first, and then Caroline, yeah, you want to come in.
Sure, I can provide a few thoughts, but I think my fellow panelists who are in this process, who have managed this process before. I'll be very curious to hear what their perspective is. This is something that at IOI we help communities do, transition from project to community, or from community to a more mature community, or more community with a sustainability plan, with a governance model. And I think that's one of the things that I would say is that there are a range of governance and business models for projects to consider. And so doing the due diligence of figuring out what your particular project needs to succeed and what makes sense in the context of who are the partners in your project, what are you trying to accomplish, what are the resources are available, looking into different ways of making that happen, and not assuming a single path forward.
Thanks, Sarah. Caroline.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to pick up on OJC is quite an interesting example here because unlike a lot of newer organisations and unlike the Open Library of Humanities, which I set up with Martin Eve 12 years ago now, we didn't have any funding. So OJC has received no funding from any research councils, from any funders. We had to launch from scratch. We managed to cobble together £20,000 of micro loans from other organisations, which included our founding members, and they will be paid back very shortly. So it's sort of, I think sometimes we forget and we expect large national funding or international funding and philanthropic agencies to kind of step in and give millions of dollars or pounds or euros towards these organizations that take years to build. And actually OJC is one, it's not always possible, and it certainly would not, and I'll hand over to Caroline because I know you're probably going to have something to say here. OJC is possible because Open Book Collective had already done that proof of concept, and that had been substantially funded, quite rightly, because books have been overlooked in open access conversations. Yeah.
Thanks. Caroline, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I'll, just add that, I think in some ways, the most important element is to kind of always keep in touch with that community. I think sometimes when kind of projects take off, they can, be very much rooted in the needs of the community and kind of inspired by that. But once they kind of start developing their own identity, they can often sometimes get a little bit detached. And so, I think it's always important to remain in communication. That, for example, is like basically what my job is. The community engagement lead is about staying in touch with that community. Our kind of governance structure means that the community is very much what shapes and drives us. And I think it is, that element of kind of always listening, always staying in touch. The kind of scaling small element, I think, also means that it's potentially easier for us to pivot or to change direction if we are getting the feedback that this is not working for us, this is not what we're looking for. So I think it is one of those areas where the kind of smaller scale and community rooted sort of design of these kind of initiatives enables us to do that in a way that the bigger ones don't.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, and I think I can kind of almost visualize a sort of a map in front of me where, you have a large circle for the larger entities and a small circle for the smaller entities. And some of the communities might grow to a sort of optimal point and still be a sort of reasonably small size. So some might grow to a sort of bigger circle, as it were. And I suppose one of the questions might be from a communications and engagement challenge is where some of those communities might overlap in a kind of interdisciplinary way. How do you manage, multiple kind of community growth, together in a sort of sector scale environment? I'm not sure there's any easy answers to that, but perhaps an interesting question.
No, and I think that the kind of memorandum of understanding and the kind of interlinks that Caroline mentioned that exists between the Open Book Collective and the Open Journals Collective, I think things like that help because we can advocate for each other at the same time, that we are having meetings that might be specifically about journals or about books, because we are so interconnected. It makes it much easier to sort of not necessarily pool that labor, but make sure that we're not always, duplicating it and that we can be supporting and reinforcing each other. And I think that's a really key element of this as well, particularly when you are talking about community sort of rooted projects to, we're all working towards the same goal. We're not competing against one another, so we can support each other.
Yeah, so part of the answer is making the most of the synergies in a smart way, across the sector. Yeah, really interesting. I think it segues onto the next question we have actually in the Q&A quite nicely, which was a question that's directed to Caroline Edwards. Is there a way libraries can help OJC with the advocacy programme aimed at editorial teams, e.g. targeting lead editors with their academic community, scope for joint events between RLUK and scholarly societies? So again, picking up on some of the conversation we've just had.
Yes, absolutely. Please get in touch. You can email me at my Birkbeck address. You can email the Open Journals Collective, info@opensjournalscollective.org. We've got an academic advocacy group that is starting to meet next month, and most of the folks on that group are kind of well-known, visible, high-profile professors of different disciplines who publish Diamond Open Access journals. Many of them have flipped away from Wiley, Springer, Taylor and Francis, Elsevier. They've got experience of that flipping process. But actually some of them, so my colleague Sarah McKee is over on the States side working for the American Council of Learned Societies. So she's a really great example of someone in a sort of engagement role with all the communities there and the scholarly associations in America. And I think it's a nice thing to maybe come back to at the end of our conversation. So Sarah had mentioned this network of networks. There are so many ways in which we can be more resource efficient. We can share policy documentation. You know, we can share processes. We don't have to be a bunch of fragmented little non-profits trying to reinvent the wheel from scratch every single time. We can share technology. You know, that impact dashboard. You know, keep an eye out for OJC is relaunching its website in a few weeks, and we'll have press releases about that. But repurposing technology that has sat dormant for 8 years, which has this incredible functionality, and then being able collectively to, you know, we're all putting in a little bit of money. We're just talking about very small pots of money, nothing that would break the bank, and being able to then make something open that the entire open infrastructure community can share, that the European partners are very interested in sharing as well. So I think it's a really exciting time to be working in this space. Yes, you know, it's very scary global times. Yes, budgets are horrendous. Yes, everything is getting cut. But that sort of forces us to be much more creative and much more innovative. We really can't afford not to do this work. We cannot afford not to collaborate and not to come up with creative new tactics for rebuilding our infrastructure, and just, without sounding Brexity, but taking back control of what belongs to us and should never have been outsourced and sold in the first place.
Well, thanks, Caroline. We're nearly to end of time, but that's a really good place to finish, I think, and reflect on what we've heard across those three excellent presentations that we've heard. I think I do feel as though this session has been a bit of a call to arms, actually, and throw ourselves a challenge as a sector to say, you know, actually, we've been taking some steps, but we've been taking some steps for, you know, we've heard about how long some of these initiatives were set up and how long they've been going. You know, how do we get from a few steps to really grasping this space, so that we're, as Caroline says, sounding a bit Marxist, taking the means of control of our own production, to you know, so that we're really thinking differently about how we invest, and where we place our money. There's not a lot of it at the moment. How can we think differently about how we place our money? We do have a bit of control over our own budgets, those of us who are kind of in institutions. So yeah, perhaps we can all take one idea away from this session to think, actually, how could I change things when I get back away from the conference? How could I make one change that might make a difference going forward?